and I'd like to invite you to the fourth of our webinars. We kind of think they're podcasts. We're not sure, but we think we're podcasting. Today it's on driving change in the district, the power of two-way streets. But before we jump in, I want to tell you just a little bit about who CDJ is. Cathedral District-Jax, Inc. Is a 7-year-old nonprofit. We have a board of about 18 people, an independent board. And we've been operating, as I said, for about 7 years. And we're operating off of a master development plan, which you'll hear a little bit about in a few minutes. To date, we have about 650 residential units either under construction, finished, or in financing. Our goal is to help facilitate about 2,500 units in the district. We're the northeast quadrant of downtown Jacksonville. We have a big focus on placemaking, which means we engage the community as well as professionals to do economic development in the community. We have with us today on this topic, which is an interesting topic, I hope, for all of you, two experts. Fred Jones. Fred is the Director of Planning and Design Collaboration at the Haskell Company. He has more than 20 years of experience in transportation planning, complete streets, which is a funny little name of the planners have a category in, urban design, placemaking, transit accessibility, and public engagement with the Haskell firm. Fred has worked in professional planning and project management since 2002. He sits on multiple committees, such as the National Complete Streets Coalition Steering Committee. He is the past chairman of the Jacksonville's Downtown Development Review Board, what we call the DDRB. And most recently, Fred served as the vice mayor of Neptune Beach, which was recognized as having one of the best complete street policies. Fred launched his career after earning a Bachelor's of Arts from the University of South Florida, and he has a master's in urban and regional planning from Florida State. Erik Aulestia. Erik is a good dear friend of mine. He is the design leader at the region and town planning studio of Torti Gallas Partners. Torti Gallas is the international urban planning firm that produced our master development plan, and it is the backbone of what CDJ work is focused on. During his 20-year career, Erik has led planning and design efforts throughout the United States and abroad for public and private sector clients. His public sector experience includes neighborhood plans, corridor plans, form-based codes, design guidelines, and urban design. In his private sector experience, Erik has done transit-oriented design, sometimes called TODs, of which we have several in Jacksonville, mixed use, sprawl repair, I love that term, sprawl repair, master plan communities, and urban design. Erik often lectures on the topics of smart growth, placemaking, and form-based codes. Erik received a Bachelor's of Landscape Architecture at Utah State University and as a certified planner. So Fred and Erik, I want to thank you both for being our experts today and for having this kind of informal conversation about changing streets in downtown Jacksonville. So I'd like to start off with just how we got to this topic and why it's important. Historically, there's always been a yin and a yang between builders, neighborhood builders, and traffic engineers. Up to this point, the traffic engineers have pretty much been the winners of that argument. When the 50s started and we put in the interstate system throughout the United States, traffic was then changed forever in the United States. It often bifurcated neighborhoods, particularly historic neighborhoods and minority neighborhoods. The historic neighborhoods depend on the exact opposite of fast traffic. They're pedestrian friendly, and fast moving one-way streets are car centric. So there's a major difference between the two. But you couple that with what's unique to Jacksonville is that Jacksonville has one of the worst records of auto and pedestrian accidents. So we have like a double whammy going on us in downtown Jacksonville. So Erik, if you would start off for us, you've written extensively about neighborhood let's go up to Erik instead of Fred, if you don't mind. You've written extensively about what's called the DNA of of neighborhoods, and I've read some of your prose on it, and it's really interesting about how a DNA of a neighborhood establishes itself and how it becomes a neighborhood. Can you kind of talk to us a little bit about how it relates to traffic and placemaking on a national or international level?
Yeah, absolutely. And in doing that, I think that you sort of need to take a step back and sort of think about the really great cities and the great neighborhoods that people love, right? And these are places that bring fond memories. They're places where people want to be and hang out. They're great neighborhoods that even draw people to come and visit them as part of their vacation from very far distances. So the question becomes, well, what makes a great and desirable neighborhood? So if we focus a little bit on today's topic, what you don't hear people say is, hey, let's go on vacation to X neighborhood because they have great highways to drive on, right? That's just not what sort of attracts people. So rather, our most loved cities are compact, mixed-use, walkable places. And so really, the way I look at it is that it's a recipe. There's a recipe for a great place. Um, Creating great neighborhoods and cities can be complicated, but if we think about it as a recipe, we can group it into 5 categories of elements. And just like baking a cake, you need to have all the ingredients and you need to have them in the right proportions to each other. So the first thing is the public realm. So that's waterfront squares, plazas, etc. But also the most common element of those is the street that really should function as part of that public realm. What is that experience for the pedestrian? Because that really matters. The second is land use, which is about how those uses interact with the public realm. The third is architecture. Again, it's about how that architecture better defines and creates the character of that public realm. And the fourth is programming, meaning what kinds of activities, what are the things that I can do there that occur in the public realm? And then the fifth one is people. So it's where do people want to spend their time? How can they interact with each other? And what's the quality of that interaction? So fantastic cities have fantastic streets, and they're an integral part of that public realm. So they're ones where people want to live on that street and they want to face it. They're ones where people want to stroll on that street. They're ones where people want to spend time talking to their neighbor on that street. They're ones where people want to walk with a child to get to a destination. They're ones where people feel safe being there, and they're ones that are beautiful, right? So it's important to point out that these things aren't just qualitative, right? Kind of esoteric things. Research also shows that these types of compact mixed-use walkable places affect behavior, and that in turn affects our health. So things like rates of hypertension, type 2 diabetes, obesity, anxiety and depression, pedestrian deaths, cancer, etc. All of these things, our behavior and our environment contribute 70% to our health. And so having walkable streets is a really key part of improving our kind of national population health. Because one of the most key things that you can do is to simply increase the amount of walking that you do. And if you have places that are pleasant for people to walk, they're much more likely to walk.
Yeah.
So research shows that these places are also more environmentally sustainable. They're also more fiscally sustainable. So unfortunately, our cities went through a period of making changes that maximize the benefits to the car at the expense of the pedestrian and at the expense of the neighborhoods. So what I'll say is that they met their goal because their goal was to accommodate traffic through traffic and actually bypass neighborhoods. So cities were pretty successful at that. And part of that was changing two-way streets into one-way streets so that way would function more like a highway. So in that case, it's not surprising, right, that these traffic sewers led to significantly decreased viability of the neighborhoods, increased crime, increased vacancy, decreased property values, reduced business vitality. But fortunately, cities are starting to recognize these mistakes, and they're recognizing the importance of maximizing and balancing the benefits between vehicles and pedestrians and neighborhoods. And so it's this understanding of the interrelationships of streets to the viability and livability of our cities and neighborhoods that's really key here.
Hmm. Thanks, Eric. That's a great history, and it makes it so easy to understand. I don't think a lot of people think about their street as much as they think about the vibe in the neighborhood.
Yep.
And that is contributory to the traffic on the street.
Yep.
So let's show what has happened in Jacksonville over the past few years is that the Downtown Investment Authority, which is the CRA for all of downtown, has really focused on trying to change the street traffic patterns. We had the biggest change when Jacksonville hosted the Super Bowl. But let's show, Kirsten, if you wouldn't mind, show the map, a couple of maps that we have for you to show you what downtown streets look like. So here's the plan that the DIA has to two-way street conversions. And the dotted lines are the future conversions to two-way, the little blue dotted lines. Now, what you might find interesting, what we find interesting, is the green outside box. That is the outline of the Cathedral District. So you can see that we're on the long-term future conversion of two-way streets, but we're not there. The ones that are a solid blue line, starting on the far left, would be the west part of downtown and running all the way down past the Cathedral District. And those are the conversion to two-way streets. So we are, again, we're not the high priority for the city for two-waying our streets, but we feel that it is a pretty important aspect of making our neighborhood have a sense of place. So Kirsten, do you have another map? I think we have two more maps, then I'm going to turn it over to Fred here to comment on this a little bit. These maps are really interesting. Everything that you see blue are roads that are maintained by the city, and everything that is green is maintained by FDOT. So you can see the vast majority of downtown is managed by the city. That's a tremendous management project. But it also means that the city is also engaged in maintaining them financially. So the priority list on what you two-way versus one-way is really key to the success of downtown, we think. So Fred, let me ask you a question here about trying to what really are the prohibitors of changing one-way streets into two-way streets? Is it the time? Is it the money? Is it the ownership? Or is it just political will? And how can we better understand what the engineering aspects are of doing something like this? I've always heard it takes forever to do it because it has to be re-engineered. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but I know it's expensive.
Yeah, well, again, I think a little bit of all the above, but Eric really did a good job of sort of laying out what I think are the values in many respects that had been lost, and we're trying to figure out a way to use those as our priorities for downtown. And again, I think when he talks about streets, I mean, they really they are the lifeblood of the community, and in many respects, they make up almost 80% of all the public space in cities. So it's a real important component of everything that we do in terms of downtown. It's really part of the fabric. And so to your point, I really think it is a fundamental question of values. When, the values in the 60s and 70s, I mean, as you can see those green lines there, it really was, I mean, the downtown streets became in many respects the victims of the high-speed arterials that were meant to move traffic over longer distances at higher speeds. And so as a result, for things to work efficiently, as that was the word of the day, was to get as many trips as we can in and out of downtown. So, we've often heard that term of, it's a downtown evacuation zone. You can quickly get in and out of downtown. So there was just this viewpoint of, well, downtown is just a place to kind of go. You might go to work there, you leave, you go back home to the suburbs, you use our nice, newly constructed interstates and high-speed arterial network to get to where you're really wanting to go, at the expense of, the original fabric of these streets and these places. And so I really think it is about values. You kind of have, you mentioned this term yin and yang. The values through which streets have often been designed and constructed, particularly over the last 50, 60 years, have been around what's the capacity of the roadway? What is this term level of service? Which is really kind of a measure of how well that roadway is carrying the traffic. And when I mean traffic, it's vehicular traffic, the amount of throughput. I love the term, Eric, auto sewers or traffic sewers. We've really done good at our using the law of thermodynamics to move people and cars through cities at the expense of the other things that are really important. On the other side of the coin is this other value of livability, safety, convenience, businesses, walkability, these kind of things that we've sort of lost sight on that seem to be less of a priority when it comes to the traffic engineering of roadways. So ultimately, a lot of times why these things do take a little bit of time is because we've often just relied on, well, the traffic engineer says if we do X and we convert it to two-way, it could theoretically increase the delay of the roadway. It might make the intersection a little bit more complicated, or it might make it slightly delayed during the peak hour. There might be parking challenges. They often view that parking arrangements are less efficient due to the vehicles traveling in both directions versus one direction. But it all really boils down to how many people we can get in and out. And when you're in these one-way pairs that we have in downtown, it does allow almost these platoon of vehicles through a green phase to move and cycle through and get in and out. And so it does that really well. But again, it's at the expense of these other values that are really important about why should we not have more businesses, slowing traffic down a bit. Actually, two-way traffic has been shown to even ease navigability. So when you're in these one-way conditions, you're actually driving further through these circuitous routes to get where you need to go, versus where two-way, it's a lot more direct. So there's a lot more, like I say, other advantages in moving to two-way. It's direct, you have more community interaction. To Eric's point, there's greater business vitality. And like I say, I think overall, there's just been this recognition, particularly in the last 20 years, that this is a good thing for business, that we want to slow people down. We want them to experience this as a place. And it's not about how fast you can move through a place, but how you can come to a place instead.
We're often compared to Tampa and St. Pete. And I know that you have an office, Eric, in Tampa, and certainly Haskell is all over the place. But how have other communities handled this conversion? Have they done it faster than we have? And has it, in your experience, has it led to the redevelopment of neighborhoods? Is it a loss leader, or is it a leader?
It's a good question. I would say that I think that it does have to do with the values of a community, right? First, you have to establish that this is a good thing, right? So I think that all of these processes really start with that idea, which is identifying the benefits, right? What are the benefits to doing that? Usually there's public involvement that's involved in that. And you have to kind of stop that kind of siloed thinking, right? You have to understand that it's not just about solving for traffic, but rather that there's an interrelationship between all of these things that impacts the livability and the quality of a place. And so I think that's when you start to see change coming with that. I think you, like any project or with a municipality, you really have to have the commitment of the leadership and the staff to actually make it happen, right? Nothing is easy to make happen. So you really need that. I think there are ways that you can get funding, right? You could be a combination of local funding and federal funding that can kind of help with that process. But it is something that can be challenging. There are communities that have done this more quickly, and there are communities which have had this on their list of things for a decade, and it hasn't happened yet, right? So it really kind of takes that commitment. What I will say is that this is most definitely a trend. This is happening in many, many cities throughout the United States. Austin, Berkeley, Cambridge, Chattanooga, Cincinnati. You mentioned St. Petersburg and Tampa, right? Those are two that are also in the process of doing that. So there are many, many different cities that are doing that. I think from a kind of benefits perspective, I think it's interesting. There's this one study that I really like that was done by John Gilderblum, right? And he and a bunch of other people in Louisville sort of studied what the impact and change was of changing two one-way streets into two-way streets. In addition, there were adjacent one-way streets, right? So they had the ability to sort of monitor for 3 years what are the changes that came about compared to itself, and how does it compare to the kind of adjacent streets? And the results were really amazing, right? What they found was that crime was reduced by 23%.
Wow.
They found that auto theft was reduced by 1/3, while at the same time it was increasing 36% on the adjacent one-way streets. There was reduced collisions among pedestrians and cars, but also among cars and cars. There was a 39% increase in property value, increase in business revenue and taxes. And, just the whole character of the area changed, right? It became sort of what you want it to be. It's the walkers and the bikers and people, chatting with each other, as opposed to, the drug dealing and the prostitution and the other things that were going on there before. And so I think that there are very concrete benefits that come from changing to two-way streets from one-way streets. But I think it really becomes communicating that, right, to the general public and to leadership, and understanding that there are really huge economic, quality of life, and business benefits.
I think Jacksonville struggles with that to a certain extent. We have, I think, a great master plan for downtown that the DIA is implementing. And there are a few years ago, they did two-way Laura Street going north and south, which is the heart of downtown, where there's an enormous concentration of important buildings there, historic buildings. But trying to move that out further and further, we always suffer from the constituency that is smaller in downtown versus the constituency that is in the burbs. And when you have 14 district council people and 5 at large, you see who the squeaky wheel gets the grease. But it's usually a money issue that I have observed, and then an engineering issue, which I think the engineer seems to be still king in the traffic planning for all of downtown. So how is this done, Erik, in Europe, where everything is, for the most part, is very pedestrian centric? Do you have any experience doing that, or can you shed some light on that? Oh, you're on mute, Erik.
Thanks. I think that there is a slightly different culture in many European cities. Many European cities also have their suburbs, right? But in the kind of old traditional historic downtowns that didn't kind of undergo the transformation that US cities did, which was tearing buildings down, building parking lots, one-way streets and highways, there's a very different culture of walking, right? And the reason for that is because in those European cities that you're thinking about, they're very pleasant places to walk, right? They're places where there's activity and uses, and it's friendly and it's safe and traffic is slow, as opposed to in many of our older cities in the United States that underwent these changes. Of course, people aren't going to be walking there, right? Who in their right mind would? Because the quality of the place is so terrible. You're walking by parking lots. It's one-way streets that feel like highways. And so I think there's just that physical environment really changes the culture. I think in US cities where you've seen them make these changes, you've seen drastic increases in the number of people that want to be outside, that want to walk on the streets. And so it's really about just making it possible for them to do that and to want to do that.
We've had a question about this street specific to the Cathedral District, now called Cathedral Hill. I wonder, Kirsten, if you could put back up the map that speaks just to CDJ and here what we are looking at. So if you look inside the green box, everything that's running east-west, the dotted lines, are targeted for conversion to two-way. So naturally, you have to assume they are one-way right now, which is a great deterrent. If you want to go to a block that's one block away, you have to go 2 blocks down, make a right, make another right, and then you can come on to it. So it adds to people's confusion about downtown. And just as an example, about 3 years ago, we produced a major Christmas event in the Cathedral District with projection mapping on the Basilica, which is on a one-way street going west. And it was during the pandemic. So we were encouraging people to come in their cars and just go slow-mo by it so they could see the show. And I can't tell you how many people we had coming up the street going north and taking a right onto the one-way street where the projection mapping was occurring. So we had to put somebody out there to say, no, 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 go around the block to get in the queue to come by it in the right way. It adds to people's frustration, and it adds to people's misunderstanding of what is downtown. So the other aspect, I think, which is a question that came in, is do one-way streets add to the vacancy? My experience of that, and I'd like both Fred and Erik to weigh in on that, is that generally speaking, a phenomena occurred all across America along with the interstate highway system, and that is referred to as white flight. When the integration of schools occurred, many people with disposable income moved to the suburbs because it was easy to get there. And it left most of downtown devastated. So in the case of the Cathedral District, what Erik's group, Torti Gallas, discovered, and what ULI discovered before we even commissioned Torti Gallas to look at the individual streets, was that of the 36 blocks in the Cathedral District, 50% of the acreage are surface parking lots. So that lends to a feeling of unsafe. There's nobody on the street. Why am I going in front of one building and then a parking lot, then another building and then a parking lot? That lends this is what Erik is referring to when he talks about the DNA of a neighborhood. So for you to feel completely safe and like you have what's called eyes on the street are the people who live there, and diminishes crime, you have to have building so that people are out on the street. So it's not that one-way streets caused the vacancies, it's other things that socioeconomically occurred, and it didn't just happen in downtown Jacksonville, it happened all across America. So Fred, if you could talk to a little bit, or Erik, about this notion of vacancies and how you overcome those vacancies when you're in a neighborhood, and you know our neighborhood very well, how you overcome that.
Well, I mean, again, you're right. It's not just, one doesn't just cause the other. But again, I think when you're in a situation where you have obliterated the blocks, the densification that's in downtown that contributes to the overall walkability, and you've created what amounts to as these auto sewers and these evacuation routes to get people out as efficiently as possible, it creates this sort of self-fulfilling prophecy that you're going to have vacancy rates that continue to remain, because why do I want to be in this place if my goal for this is to get out of here? So it doesn't lend itself. We know in urban areas that a lot of the business vibrancy is based around the concept of walkability. So if there's nobody out walking, they don't feel safe. You've kind of created this area of a vast sea of parking. There's no building, there's no frontages, there's no vibrancy. It lends itself to continue to be a place where no one is going to want to continue to invest in. And I also should say something earlier. I wanted to mention, I think part of all of this is driven by this longing. I think what we have to do collectively is rethinking congestion. You always hear about road improvements as meaning we're trying to solve traffic congestion. You'll see a new roadway. How many times do you see we need a lane here? We need a lane here. We need to do some improvements to the capacity or operations of some intersection, all in this name of chasing our tail in solving congestion. In an urban area, we probably should just take it for what it is. I mean, it's actually a good thing. The last time I checked, congestion to me means that there's pent up demand for goods and services in your town. So to the extent that we're trying to continue to solve it to get so that cars can move faster and get in and out, you're really sort of, it's a counterproductive goal, if you will, because the real goal is to create wealth and prosperity in these downtown urban centers. And if our goal, and if we're trying to do what we can to get people quickly in and out, it doesn't end up working. So I think we have to really begin with this idea of thinking about congestion, particularly in urban areas, as okay. And it really is a reflection of the pent up demand for goods and services. But yeah, I mean, I really think in downtown Jacksonville, a lot of the vacancy rates, it's just been a self-fulfilling prophecy. That's an extension of this two-waying, this parking lots everywhere, and the lack of investment that happens. And so it just, they kind of, one doesn't necessarily cause the other, but one does continue to perpetuate the other.
Erik, do you want to weigh in on that just
Yeah.
a little bit too? I mean, do the
Yeah.
one-way streets cause vacancies, or are they just a byproduct of it?
I think there are a lot of different reasons. I think that the one-way streets are one of the things, right? So I don't know how many times I have heard people tell me, I don't want to go to that downtown because it's too confusing. There are too many one-way streets. I don't know how to get around there. So we do a lot of retail. And when you do retail, a lot of what you're thinking about is reducing the amount of friction that it takes for a potential purchaser to go to where get what they want to get, right? So if you make it hard for people to get there, they're not going to make that decision to go and do it, right? So
Yeah.
just that one-way idea just drives people away. You miss a certain segment of the market, right? A little bit off topic, but because you mentioned all of the parking lots, right? That's the other piece of this. A lot of times when we talk about revitalization, we're saying, well, neighborhoods want to have some retail component to them, right? Why aren't they here? There's a study that was done that showed that when people are walking down a main street, if you have a gap of like 2 or 3 stores, that people will actually stop and turn around because they perceive the energy to have died, even if there's stores beyond those 2 or 3 vacant spaces, right? So that consistency of activity is really important. So when you sort of couple the one-way streets and the difficulty getting there, and then you couple it with parking lots, right? People just don't want to go walk by empty parking lots, right? And so I think that speaks to this whole idea that all of these pieces work together, and they have to work together in order to make really great places that are vibrant.
Yeah, it's such an interesting weaving of ideas and thoughts to make a neighborhood really vibrant. Part of my job, which I would say about 75% of my job, is trying to convince unwilling sellers to be sellers. And they mostly are the surface parking lots. So they're underutilized assets that in some instances people may have inherited, or they just see them as necessary for the building that they're renting, rather than trying to improve the location of them or improve the use of the parking arrangements for their tenants. And they're quite resistant to becoming what I call willing sellers. If you can combine 1 or 2 of these large parking lots, you have then enough land to do housing, on-site housing, and we have blessed in so many ways in the Cathedral District with this topo of a 10-foot drop-off on all 4 sides. The center of the Cathedral District is the highest point in the city. And that 10-foot drop-off is the size of an underground parking garage. So Ashley Square, that opened last spring, has underground parking to it. The lofts at Cathedral, which are under construction right now, have a certain portion of them underground. So 10 feet is a big drop-off. So parking is an issue that we haven't talked about, but it definitely relates to these parking lots and to one-way streets. And I know just as an aside, a personal side, my dentist is downtown, but to get to the parking garage that she pays for, if you want to go in there, you have to go 3 blocks down, 4 blocks up, 2 blocks back to get to the entry into it. So I just park on the street. I mean, it's a lot easier, and then go out and put a meter, put some time on the
Yep.
meter. But that's exactly what you're talking about, is that it makes it less conducive to retail if you have to struggle to get to the shop that you want to go to. So we have had a couple of questions, and I've tried, I want to remind you that if you have a few questions, you can just go to the bottom. There's a little button on the bottom that you can ask a question. And it's some questions that have come in have talked about the juxtaposition of town center, the St. John's Town Center versus downtown, and that's all about retail. So several years ago, I will tell you that the Urban Land Institute annually gives out tremendous awards for the best design and the most successful projects for a big swath of Northeast Florida. And Town Center did not receive the recognition that year, the year that it was open. And it was because most of the people who were judges, which were a lot of them were scholars that looked at the position of the town center, they saw surface parking, loads and loads and loads of surface parking. But what town center has going for it, which downtown doesn't have, is that you can pull right up in front of your store and go to that store, depending on traffic that day, or you can park just a little bit further away in a larger lot where you can park. So downtown retail is what follows rooftops. That's historically been the story of economic development and retail in general. So both of you, could you comment just a little bit about what you think will make retail grow in downtown Jacksonville, or if it really is a desirable idea to place retail back into downtown, or should it be high density residential?
Yeah, so the retail follows houses, right? So if you want to get more retail, you need to bring more people there. And you can bring them in a couple of different ways, right? So one is just like have them drive from the suburbs. It would have to be something really spectacular and special, right? But I think it's much more important to bring more people to live downtown, right? That's going to bring the rooftops that retailers need to support them. And unfortunately, as we know, our cities at one point sort of emptied out. What we've seen is that kind of rebirth of people moving back to the cities. And that's been very, very good for many, many cities. I don't think we've done enough there. I think we need to continue to bring more residential into our downtowns. To some extent, I think you almost need to not worry about the retail. You need to focus on that residential, and the retail will come, right? Because they'll be able to make money doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a real need, probably, especially now post-pandemic, you see this in the office market, is that there's probably a need to be more flexible in what it is. It's getting that building frontage right, creating these public spaces. There's a lot of movement now about like, what is the draw for downtown? Maybe it isn't going to be necessarily retail in the future, but it's going to be a neighborhood in which people live here. And what are the amenities surrounding it, the public spaces, reimagining, garages and things of that nature. So I just think we probably need to be, you're right, more flexible on what those uses, but really concentrating on getting people to live here. And, the necessary things that they want will end up coming out of that.
So what I have discovered is that the thrust of most downtown redevelopment today has been focused on residential, not retail, but on residential. And then the offshoot is that the public sector puts in the park spaces and the places where public gatherings occur, and that seems to draw the residential even more. And I think that many downtowns are much more, unfortunately, ahead of us in that aspect. And I'm hoping that once Jacksonville, if you look at the different neighborhoods, I think there's 7 different neighborhoods in downtown Jacksonville. Some are way ahead of the others in the aspect of creating more residential. So if you guys could weigh in just a little bit, maybe Fred more so because you're local, on what you think, and because you were the head of the DDRB, what you think is the trend in Jacksonville downtown for residential and the look. I'm interested in that. And do the streets, the topic today, do the streets really matter if they're one way, if we do high density on a street?
Yeah, that's an interesting, it's a good question. Again, being on this for some time, I've often said, we want to see the cranes, we want to see the development interests coming. I think that there is sometimes a little bit of mismatch still between our streets and infrastructure and those desirable land use and investment products that we want to see. I mean, I think about where I sit, Riverside Avenue, for one. I've been saying for years, it's, 3 lanes in either direction. It's an offshoot of an FDOT facility. And then we see some investment happening, but it still kind of looks a little bit suburban, because I think the developers are responding to the typology of that roadway. It's like, is this a place where you really want to be up front to the corner of the street in a walkable environment? So I do think that there needs to be an emphasis and an investment on getting our streets and infrastructure right. We've been talking for years about protected bike lanes or cycle tracks. I mean, we've got the Emerald Trail here, which is an amazing project, but there's a lot of other smaller scale projects that we've been talking about for years that we want to, we should get those underway. Those are the types of great public investments. And I think about in Tampa, a lot of that stuff that's happened, their success and revitalization was really driven by, Tony Vinnick, who owns the Lightning and done a lot of the development there, read Jeff Speck's walkability and came back and said, this is what we really need to do. Let's, focus on two-waying the streets. Let's put protected bike lanes in here. Let's make it an environment through which people want to walk and bike safely. And that is in turn going to that's going to spawn the investment that we want to see happen here, as opposed to sort of, waiting for a magic silver bullet or some development project at a transactional level to come and then see what they do. And we'll see what we can make to connect to it. So I think what we have to do is really take a sense of pride and ownership in our network here and go, what are the places that we want to connect and redesign, and let the market be responsive to that? Because to me, that shows we have high self-esteem as a city, and that we're ready to be, this is where we want to do business, but this is kind of what we expect, and come here and look what we've done, kind of thing. So I do feel like, and they're not heavy lifts. I mean, I think these are things that we can accomplish. And two-waying the streets is just one of those things. I know it's been sitting out there for years, but to me, it's an easy switch. We go forward with that, and we start investing in this type of infrastructure for active transportation, and that's going to get people to come.
Right. I mean, the public perspective, the public responsibility versus the private responsibility is almost equal to a certain extent. I mean, a residential development over 120 units is, $25 million to put in. But the public responsibility is to make sure that you have the parks and that they're maintained and they're beautiful, and that the streetscape is attractive to make people want to be on it. And that and particularly in Jacksonville, where we want to enhance the beauty of our natural asset, which is St. Johns River. So that's the public aspect. That's what Tampa learned, that they devoted their focus on. And then what came was the development right behind the Riverwalk. So we're getting near the end of our time. We've had several questions, and I want to give a little plug for what we're going to do upcoming. Kirsten, if you could put up what we're doing for the balance of this year, that would be helpful. We have an interesting discussion on about adaptive reuse of commercial buildings on July 24. And on December 2nd, we're calling it Unlock the Past Through Architecture, is the second of a walking tour through the Cathedral District. We had just a ton of people who did this last time. And we chose to do it in December because the 5 historic churches who are in the neighborhood will all be dressed up for Christmas. if you are interested in any one of these, look for, be sure, if you've registered today, we have your name and your email address, and we'll let you know when these are being scheduled and who the speakers will be. We have some of the speakers lined up now. And then I would be really remiss if I didn't, Kirsten, show us our sponsors so that I can recognize them. We are so fortunate to have these sponsors behind us with CDJ, and many of them are architects. I hope they're all watching today. Michael Dunlop and Zykovich, which is a new sponsor to us that will be on one of our future speaking engagements. And Casper Architects, which I want to do a shout out to Erik Casper. He is relocating part of his corporate headquarters into the Cathedral District into a building that is going to be adaptively reused to his architectural headquarters. So without these sponsors, we would not be able to do any of this and move forward. So I want to say just one or two last things about where we're headed with the Cathedral District. Our goal, as I said at the beginning, is to try to help facilitate 2,500 new units. That'll put about 5,000 people into the district. We started out with about 1,500 people, most of which are housed in 3 senior towers that are about a little over 650 people living in those towers, which Erik mentioned the idea of siloing that figuratively and literally is what has happened to a lot of seniors. You don't see them out on the street, whether it's fear of safety or whether there's not enough retail to attract them to the street or not. We're kind of in between both of those, but it's important that what we do is we're what we call, what I just say, stay in my lane, which is to get these parking lots turned into residential units. And so we're focused wholeheartedly on that. So I want to thank everybody for attending today, and I want to thank both Erik and Fred for being our experts. And thank you for everybody who attended. We had almost 50 people attending today. Thank you so much and have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.